I always thought I knew the shape of my childhood, not in the way one remembers every detail with photographic precision, but in the way a house remembers its own walls, the rhythm of familiar rooms, the smell of worn wood, the spaces where sunlight used to fall in the late afternoon. My memories weren't extraordinary, but they felt whole. Contained. Intact in their smallness. I had grown up as an only child in a quiet town, raised by a woman who rarely spoke about the past and almost never kept anything that didn't serve a purpose. My mother was orderly, elegant, deliberate in her silence, the kind of person who folded letters she never sent and placed them in drawers no one was supposed to open. After she died, I told myself I had made peace with how little I truly knew about her. I had gone through her closets, her boxes, her drawers, everything arranged as if even her grief had been curated, and I told myself that some lives were simply quieter than others. That not every story needs a revelation. That I had no reason to expect more than I'd been given. But it was a lie I'd grown comfortable living inside. And then, on an overcast afternoon in late October, the kind of day that hangs in the air like a held breath, I found the photo. I hadn't meant to find anything. I'd gone into the attic simply to escape the noise of the world below, the flat hum of life continuing after loss, the bills, the phone calls, the vague offers of help from people who didn't know what to do with silence. The attic had always been a strange place, not quite forgotten, but sealed off in the way memories often are, deliberately untouched. Dust moved there in slow, private spirals. The light came in sideways through a window so small it barely remembered how to illuminate. I sat on the floor without thinking, surrounded by boxes labeled in my mother's careful script, winter coats. Old bills. Junk. And one L. Just the letter. Alone. No context. No date. I opened it. Inside, beneath a stack of yellowed notebooks and brittle letters addressed to no one, was a small photo album. It was unremarkable on the outside, soft brown leather, worn along the spine, the kind that could be bought anywhere, held anything. But the way it had been placed, not stored, not tucked, but almost hidden, made my hands pause before I reached for it. The first few pages were faded black and white images, a woman I didn't know in a 1960s dress, standing beside a car, smiling too directly into the sun. A picnic, a blurred dog, someone blowing out candles in a kitchen I didn't recognize. And then, on the third page, I turned to a photograph that made the air around me feel heavier, as if the attic itself had drawn in breath. It was me. Or, a version of me. 6 years old, maybe 7. Hair loose, eyes half closed, and the kind of laughter that only children know how to wear without shame. But it wasn't just the resemblance. It wasn't just the bone structure or the nose or the posture. It was the scar, small, pale, curved like a whisper across the bridge of my nose, the one I got falling off a tricycle when I was 4. I stared at the image, trying to find some other explanation, some trick of light or distant cousin I'd never known. But my body knew what my mind refused to accept: the child in that photo was me. And yet, the people around me weren't mine. The woman crouched beside me, her hand placed so gently on my shoulder it almost hurt to look at it, had a softness I couldn't place. Her eyes were not my mother's, nor were they strangers. There was something in the way she tilted her head toward mine that suggested intimacy, familiarity, a kind of protection that doesn't come from posing but from years. And the man, older, tall, smiling in a way that reached all the way to his eyes, had his arm wrapped around both of us as if he'd always done it. And behind us, slightly out of focus, a teenage boy leaned against a porch railing, looking not at the camera, but at me. His expression was unreadable, not distant, but not quite close. Protective, maybe. Or unsure. I turned the photo over. There was no date. No names. No handwriting. Nothing to tether the image to anything real. It existed without anchor. And yet, it was somehow the most intimate thing I'd ever held. I flipped through the rest of the album with hands that no longer felt like mine. There were more. Me, standing in front of a small lake, wearing a red coat I'd never seen before, grinning with the kind of joy that doesn't come easily. Me, asleep in someone's arms on a couch I didn't recognize, curled in like I belonged there. Me, on a swing. Me, at a table with a birthday cake, candles flickering. Always surrounded by the same people. Always smiling. Always seeming at home. But I had no memory of any of it. None. And my mother had never mentioned these people. Not once. She had always told me it was just the two of us. That there had never been anyone else. That my father had disappeared before I was born. That we'd built a life with what we had. But this album said something else. It whispered of another story. A second life. A chapter torn out. I sat there for hours, the light in the attic dimming until I could barely see the photos anymore. But I couldn't close the book. I couldn't walk away. Because even in the silence of that forgotten room, I felt it, the quiet pull of a truth I hadn't been ready to hold. And the most haunting part wasn't the question of who those people were. It was the growing certainty that, once, I had loved them. And that, somehow, they had loved me too. In the days that followed, I found myself returning to the photo album as if it were a mirror I didn't entirely trust, not because I doubted what I'd seen, but because I wasn't sure who was looking back. I would open the cover carefully, as if afraid something might have changed, that perhaps I'd imagined it, that the child in the photograph would vanish, or worse, become someone else. But she never did. She remained there, frozen in moments I didn't remember but couldn't stop feeling, as if each image contained a piece of me that had once been alive and had gone dormant without my permission. I became obsessed, quietly, the way people do when their entire foundation begins to tilt and they know they can't speak about it out loud, not because no one would believe them, but because saying it aloud would make it too real. I tried to trace the photographs, not the images themselves, but the settings. I zoomed in on corners, backgrounds, tried to read street signs in the distance, labels on a ketchup bottle, a book spine behind someone's shoulder. I was hoping, perhaps naively, that a detail might break the silence wide open and point me in the direction of the truth. But there were no clues. Only atmosphere. Only feeling. Until one morning, when I returned to the attic in search of something, anything, that might connect the faces in the album to the life I'd known. I dug through drawers, boxes, envelopes filled with receipts and expired IDs, nothing. And then, behind a stack of old photo frames, I found a key. It was small, brass, aged but not rusted. Tied to a note that simply read. For the storage unit. Don't throw away. There was no address. No number. Just that. I didn't recognize the handwriting. It wasn't my mother's, her script was sharp, slanted, always neat. This was rounder, messier, as if written quickly or by someone not used to writing much at all. And yet the phrasing, the quiet directness of it, felt familiar. I called the only storage company in town, and after 3 awkward explanations and a bit of pleading, a woman agreed to let me check for a match. And when the lock clicked open under my hand, a breath I hadn't realized I was holding released all at once, because I already knew this place before I stepped inside. Not the space itself, but the air, the feeling of entering a room built by someone you once loved deeply and without memory. It was small. Dusty. Filled with the detritus of someone's life, boxes of old letters, a child's red raincoat hung neatly on a hook, toys faded by time but not decay. There was a rocking chair, worn thin at the arms, and a blanket folded too precisely to have been forgotten. And then, a box with my name. Not my full name. Not the one on my ID. The name only one person used for me, the one my mother whispered when I had fevers, the one she stopped using after I turned 10. It was a name wrapped in childhood. Inside the box were drawings. Crayon, pencil, charcoal, all clearly made by a child. My handwriting. My style. A house with 4 figures, me, the woman from the photo, the man, and the boy. And then, letters. Bundles of them. From the woman in the photo. All addressed to my mother. I read them in silence, fingers trembling over paper gone soft at the creases. The tone was gentle, almost apologetic. She never demanded anything. Only asked, month after month, if she could see me again. If she could send a gift. If she could come by the park, just to watch from a distance. In one letter, written in shakier script, she said, "I know you think I gave up my right to be near her. Maybe I did. But I carried her in my heart every single day. I still do. I always will." I read until the words began to blur. Not because they stopped making sense, but because I did. I drove home in silence that day, the box strapped into the passenger seat like something fragile, sacred, heavy. And I began to understand, not the full picture, not yet, but enough. Enough to know that the people in the photographs were not strangers. They were not borrowed. They were real, and once, they had been mine. What happened between them and my mother, that was still unclear. But I could see the outlines now, something fractured, something painful, something unspeakable that had led her to draw the line between past and present, and place me firmly on one side of it. She had built a life out of absence and filled it with silence. And I, unknowingly, had lived inside her edits. But memory is persistent. And blood, it seems, does not forget so easily. I didn't know what to do with what I'd found. There was no one left to ask. But there was a name, finally, written on one of the envelopes. An address in a nearby town. And a feeling I couldn't shake. The following weekend, I drove there. I didn't call ahead. I didn't know what I would say. I only knew I needed to see her, the woman whose hands had once rested on my shoulder, whose letters had never stopped, even when the door had closed. When she opened the door, she didn't speak. Her face didn't change. She simply looked at me, really looked, and in that silence, something passed between us that didn't need words. Recognition. Grief. And something so full of love it made my knees go weak. And then she whispered, not asking, "You came back."